cross-fertilizing cross-fertilizing ideas that we see across many industries. We don't just work within the charitable sector, we work across many verticals. We work either with a full service capability or just with our platform. But one of the real sort of benefits that we have as agencies, not just us, but agencies in general, is working across many industry verticals. And it's about this cross-fertilizing of ideas that we can bring to different sectors and different verticals. So today's presentation is all about around account-based marketing. Now, the reason I've chosen this is that whilst we're obviously going to go through lots of data and look at the insights that we run across a survey of consumers, 500 consumers in the UK. But what I think is also really beneficial is look at strategies to scale donor bases, not just obviously retention and loyalty is obviously key, but working out ways to scale the donor base is also really, really important. And there are many ideas and ways we've seen across different verticals that I think are going to be particularly interesting in this sector. One of the approaches that we see is this approach called account-based marketing, and we're actually using it at QMind as well. And it's an approach to well, consumers in many other industry verticals, but donors obviously within this sector. And it's a really interesting and quite clever way of approaching not just building and scaling donor bases, but engaging, retaining them as well. So I just wanted to talk really in two ways, really. One is to show some data and insight from the survey that we conducted just on the general donor market, but really how does that apply to this account-based marketing campaign, and how could charities use this to scale donor bases as well as retain and engage them going forward. So the approach to this today is really twofold. One is the data, and one is this accounts-based marketing approach. So forgive the terminology accounts-based marketing. I think you're going to have to make a slight mental leap in terms of putting that language aside for a minute and just thinking about this approach and how it can be adapted to your particular charity. Because I think this can be applied not just to large-scale charities, perhaps like something like the Samaritans, but also more micro, smaller charities right at the lower level who are looking to expand and grow. Because I think particularly at the micro level, obviously resource and time and effort is particularly challenging. And many charities will grow based on networks, based on personal connections. But there comes a point when that can only go so far. And the question is, how do you then go to the next level and scale that donor base without reliance on individuals? Because naturally those individuals might move on to something else, and where does that leave the charity? So I think this account-based marketing approach can be adapted to any particular vertical, and it's really about trying to get this wheel turning of automatically creating warm donor potential donors that can then be converted into longer term donors. So that's the sort of broad idea. So if you look at this sort of the 5 stages, so it's thinking about a targeted approach to audiences. And one of the reasons for showing the data today is showing how that can be used to target different audiences, because they're all actually quite subtly different when you get under the skin of the top level data. And then it's about aligning the team to engage with these decision makers and donors, thinking about customizing campaigns to different audience groups, and then coordinating these multi-channel approaches to actually achieve that messaging to the key groups, and then measuring performance to optimize as we go from there. So as I said, you can take all bits of or some of this approach and adapt it to your particular charity and stage you're at with your growth. But really, I think it's about creating this automated approach that can keep the wheel turning to create create new and engaged donor bases. So we conducted a survey of 500 consumers in the UK and then weighted that up to the national to be nationally representative. That's the standard approach in market research. And what you see here is the weighted proportions of the sample that we've looked at. So slightly more females, so 51% females and 49% male. A bit more older, so 55% 45 plus. And obviously income levels slightly under the 50K mark, 64% as well. So this really is representative of the UK sample that we take it from there. So just to give you some sort of couple of slides on the sort of top line data, do you donate now and how often? You can see that 65% of the UK population do donate regularly or occasionally. And we'll have a look at this group in a little bit more detail in a minute, because obviously when you're thinking about how do you grow the donor base, moving donors onto regular payments is obviously pretty key. So looking at the difference in occasional and regular donors is obviously really important. How do you move donors along that pipeline? And then we have 20% who volunteer and 15% who don't engage. So we're thinking 85% of the UK population will either volunteer or donate so there's very high engagement levels within the charitable sector. And what sort of type of causes do you donate to? Well, there are obviously many and varied, but when you look at perhaps the top 5, health and medical stand out as the top, 70%. And then when you look at the other sectors, it's as you would expect, really, looking at pets and wildlife, mental health, human services such as food banks and that type of thing, and the environmental concerns. So I don't think there's anything particularly unusual there. And there's other areas like services and education, but they're much smaller in terms of what people donate to. So these would be your sort of top 5 that we see in the UK. And what are the top 3 motivators to donate? What I think is, as you would expect, the top one is desire to help others. But then the next 2 are quite interesting, and we'll be looking at these a little bit more detail in a minute. Personal belief to the cause and a personal connection to the cause. So obviously you want to believe in what you're donating to, and demonstrating how much value your charity is bringing to the target audience you're helping is getting that message over is actually really crucial, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But obviously personal connection is a pretty important one. But this, again, one would expect that to be a physical personal connection, but it can be a digital one as well. So building out those digital personal connections is also a really important way that the account-based marketing approach can help scale that particular group. So getting into the detail of the data a little bit more, and this is really how we sort of form the basis of an accounts-based marketing approach. And again, I'm using the language of accounts-based marketing. That's a little bit sort of business to business speak. So just be aware that language can be adapted, because it's all about this sort of targeting the audience. So the first thing to have a look at is, when we look at personal beliefs, they're quite polarized, interestingly. Females are more motivated by the personal belief, and it's really either end of the age spectrum that the belief motivation is stronger. So amongst the sort of 18 to 24 and 45 plus, not so much in that sort of middle age bracket. So the point is, if you're thinking your current donor base is either young or old or more female orientated, the message around belief is going to be more stronger that you need to put over in terms of trying to recruit or expand that base, if that's particularly the case. Personal connections is stronger within, as you say, with the more female orientated donors, and also particularly in the much older group, the 55 plus. So it's less so with your younger targeted audience. So I think if you're looking at how do you grow your donor base and where your skews are in terms of what you currently have, obviously, if you're, as I said in the previous slide, if you're looking at the younger age groups, the belief is more stronger than the personal connection, whereas the older age groups are much more focused around this personal connection. Now, as I said earlier, the personal connection is obviously a physical one, but it can also be a digital one. Most of the 55-year-olds are all digital now, online. So building and expanding personal connections through that route is also just as effective as the physical personal connection as well. So the first sort of message really, and I guess one of the bases for this account-based marketing approach is think carefully about your current donor base, what is successful at the moment, and then start to think about how do you broaden that group. So sort of like the sort of layers of an onion approach, where you're thinking, how do I go from core to wider groups? So looking at that demographic profile is really, really important. And then obviously thinking about how do you then connect with these groups. Well, obviously donors look at multiple different ways. News and media, and I know social media looks sort of down the bottom there, so I will probably connect social media and news and media together. But news media is one of the biggest ways they find out about charities. And obviously you're then looking at friends and families, that personal connection, but then looking at websites and newsletters and that type of thing. So thinking about that sort of younger age group, if that's the group that you're looking to target and want to grow, putting over the message around personal belief is obviously really, really important through these channels. And then you've got the events, fundraising events, not as important as some of the top three, but still quite important. And interestingly, street collections are there as well, reasonably sort of about 12, 13% find out through those street collections as well. But again, we won't look at this particular day, but just to make you aware that more older females are much more open to the street collection approach than perhaps your sort of younger males or that sort of type of thing. So again, there are some subtle differences even when you get to that sort of level in terms of how you find out. But the important thing about the account-based marketing approach is how you mesh these together and what you dial up and dial down in terms of these different channels to reach these different groups. So when you think about friends and family, they can be slightly different for different groups. Females are more informed by friends and family, and your 45, 54 also by friends and family. And as we saw earlier, that personal connection is much more important for this age group. So using the friends and family, and not just that physical connection, but through digital channels such as Facebook, social media, Instagram, and even LinkedIn as well, can expand those connections as well. So if you're thinking perhaps my ideal profile is more female orientated, more older, then this is going to be a really important route for you. Interestingly, one of the other things I want to highlight, because it shows a bit of an extreme, is the events one as well. Because obviously, naturally, you would think events is going to be really engaging for your higher income earners, and is obviously, yes, it is very important, as you can see there. But also, interestingly, more younger age group, 25 to 30-year-olds, are also overly find events really important. But as you can imagine, an event for a high income earner, 100K plus, is going to be radically different to an event that's for 25 to 34-year-olds who engage through that. So again, this is another example where if you're looking at the account-based marketing route and you want to target certain age groups, certain groups, because that's where you see the opportunity, looking at these events in this way is going to be really important, particularly if you're targeting these younger age groups. So that's just some thoughts around how this approach, when you look at segmenting the consumer, when you think about how do we engage with them, through what channels, and what messages that we want to dial up or dial down, be it the personal belief or whatever in your charity. So that's just a really important first point. The second one is thinking about, okay, how do we then scale this donor database? Well, obviously the quickest route is going to be thinking about we've got occasional donors and we want to move them into regular donors. And we can see here on a national level, 40% donate occasionally, one-off events, for example, and 25% donate regularly. And then we obviously have to see that breakdown in volunteering as well. But certainly when you look at this donation side of things, thinking about what is the profile of the occasional donors, and how do we make them into regular, is a really important part of the accounts-based marketing approach. So if you think it's in 3 layers, we want to bring people on to make them aware of our charity and donate occasionally, and then we want to move them into donating regularly, which obviously is going to be much more great from an income perspective. And how do those profiles differ? So on a national level, and again, you will need to look at this in terms of your own current data sets. You can see when you look at occasional donors, they are more female orientated. They tend to be a bit younger. And also we've got a high proportion of high income earners who are actually donating occasionally as well. So when we think about perhaps the more female donation, we can see that they over-index in that personal connections. They're also into the personal beliefs, as well as do the younger donations as well. So thinking about how do we, in this instance, in this example, how would we move the occasional donators to more regular donators? Well, we would look at dialing up the messaging around how they can believe in our cause more, and by demonstrating the case studies and how the benefit to our target audience, and dialing up that message will be really important to move them into more regular occasions as well, and particularly if we're targeting these younger age groups. So in this instance, obviously looking at a national level, but then thinking about it from your own current group of donors, then what is the messaging you want to dial up and dial down to move them along this pipeline? When we look at the typical type of occasional donation, they tend to be sub £50 through the year, but there's a decent proportion, just under a quarter, that are £50 to £100. So you're thinking something like sort of sub £5 a month, or maybe £5–10 each time, that sort of type of thing. But at least they're actually donating as well, even if on an occasional basis. When we look at regular donors, obviously they are, again, quite different. We see that it's a slightly older age group, and obviously, and it looks to be a bit more male orientated in terms of regular donators, as we've seen it on a national level, and higher income as well. So the total average across the sample is 25%. So we can see that the 65 plus are more regular, and we see that it's 30% for the male. So again, that is what the sort of profile of your regular is, but moving the occasional donators into regular is going to be absolutely really important as well. So looking at the different profiles and how you leverage those is going to be absolutely crucial. And again, when you look at the regular donations, obviously one of the benefits of moving them from occasional to regular is that increase in income, because the regular donors, 43% are doing £50 to £100 per annum, and 44% are doing £100 plus per annum. So you can see that the ability to move donors from unaware of your charity through to occasional donations through to regular donations will naturally uptick on a more regular income basis. So understanding those segments and what messages to give them to move along that pipeline, awareness, occasional, regular, is the most crucial thing, and understanding who is going to be more likely to move along that chain, so that you concentrate your resource on that groups, is the most fundamental part of this approach. So when we think about how to do this, I think some of the messages that we've really been talking about is this segmentation of the donor base. And as you've seen, I've used some examples of data across the board to see how you might approach this, and what is the best way to do it. So the really important part about this is to segment up your current donor base. I've looked at it from a top-down national level. And you can see some key differences by occasional and regular. So segmenting up that donor base and thinking about, okay, what are the messages we need to dial to each of those segments? What are our low-hanging fruit, and how can we move them along the chain is going to be really important. So it's not just the current data set, it's thinking about, okay, how many of that group are out there in the UK, given that 85% donate or engage with charities? How can we bring that group along this pipeline? So that segmentation piece is the first really important approach to take. Then it's thinking about, okay, so if we've identified this low-hanging fruit through the segmentation, what media channels do we need, or personal connections do we need to do to reach this group? And it's that putting out that group and understanding that group is going to be the most important thing, because that is where a lot of time, effort, and resource is wasted, and you need to focus that time, effort, and resource on that group. And then once you've created these personas from the segmentation, understand how to engage with them, creating good content. And obviously it's not just one-off content, it's multiple content, from newsletters to case studies to demonstrating the value, if you're dialing up the belief message in your content, and how that's going to be targeted at your persona. So creating that content flow, and then the content schedule to target that group, so that you're coordinated in your approach to that, because obviously that is where you get the resource drain. And if you're a micro charity, resource is really, really important, because once you've created these first 4 steps, it enables you to move beyond the personal connections and the personal drivers of people who are generating donors to a more sophisticated, more automated approach that's creating this pipeline of new donors that are going to be coming in, that you can then move along the chain from occasional to regular donors. And then obviously monitoring and looking at that approach, and how those, how it's performing, enables you to optimize this whole approach, and then work out how to keep optimizing it going forward and measuring performance. So in summary, and it gives us a few minutes to have a Q&A if there's any questions out there, is the key tick list to adapting this accounts-based marketing approach to your charity and the sector. So creating that list of optimum donor profiles will be step 1. Identifying your sporadic base that you can then engage more with your content through your content schedule, that can then bring them down the pipeline. And then, sorry, excuse me, just bring that back down to the last slide. Give your tip list. And then using these multiple channels to actually achieve and get to those people will be really important. And then leveraging those wider connections. And I highlighted this earlier on, when it wasn't just physical personal connections, it's also the wider digital connections, even with the older age groups. So leveraging those as well, and then showing the benefits of what your charity is bringing to your target group, are absolutely fundamental. So here's your 5-step tick list that I hope that gives you some ideas and thoughts to take away, as well as some nice data to have with you as well. So thank you for joining. And if you have any questions, please feel free to fire away.
So I'll just open up the floor to a few of our attendees if there's any questions you'd like to share. I've enabled the talk function.
Oh, great. Hi, Lucinda. Hi, Victoria. Don't want to put you on the spot, but feel free to. But if not a problem.
No,
and
that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And everyone who has attended will have the free copy of the report, so and all the data. And if you have any thoughts or questions afterwards, then please feel free to ask. I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victoria. Appreciate it. Thanks, Lucinda, and appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.